Hi there, my name is Matti Sulanto, and in this video I'm gonna tell you why the fully automatic P exposure mode is actually really good. So today I'm gonna be shooting on the P mode, only the P mode. And my camera is the G90 and my video camera is the G9. But let's first take one picture and see how the camera performs on the P mode and if the exposure values make any sense. It's not really that interesting, the scene, but I'm getting something like f4 1500 of a second, ISO 200, which makes perfect sense to me. I would probably choose very similar values if I was using the full manual mode, the M mode. And talking about the M mode, the full manual exposure mode, what is so special about it? It lets you choose whatever exposure values you want, right? But it still won't let you choose any values because the amount of light pretty much sets the limits to what kind of values make any sense. Today is a pretty bright day, and if I say let me shoot an example on manual mode. If I want to choose, say, f1.7 and 1/30th of a second, and let's see what comes out. Okay, I'm gonna set f1.7 and let me turn the camera on first and choose 1/30th of a second, and I'll take a picture like that. And as you can see, it's way overexposed and beyond repair in post. Even if I shot raw, there's no way I can save that. And if I wanted to use f1.7 in this situation, I'd have to choose something like 1/4000th of a second to get any kind of sensible exposure. And then again, if I wanted to use 1/30th of a second, I would have to use something like f16 to get any kind of sensible exposure in this amount of light. So as you can see, the manual mode is no magic bullet that lets you do anything you want with your exposure values. But there is a place for the full manual mode, the M mode. For example, if your light level stays absolutely the same all the time throughout the whole shoot, it makes sense to choose manual mode, and then you can make sure that your exposure stays the same also throughout the whole shoot. And if you're shooting in a studio kind of environment using manual strobes or flashes, then of course you're gonna set your exposure values manually also, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. At this point, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to my channel and also sign up for my monthly newsletter. There's a link in the description, but you can also go to my website sulanto.fi. I'm gonna take another picture now on the P mode and see if the exposure values make any sense. Okay, I'm getting f4 500th of a second, which pretty much makes sense to me. I probably would have chosen exactly the same values if I was using some other exposure mode like the M or whatever mode. And the P mode makes a lot of sense, especially on a day like this or any time when the light is changing constantly. Right now it's semi-cloudy and sometimes the sun is behind the clouds, sometimes it's not. As you can see in this video, probably the exposure is changing, and when I'm using the P mode, I'll get pretty much the perfect optimal exposure anytime I turn on my camera. If I was using manual mode, I'd have to adjust my aperture or shutter speed constantly all the time. And there are so many situations where the exact exposure values don't really matter that much. Say travel photography, family photos, and all kinds of general photography. If the aperture is f4 or f4.5 or f5.6, who cares? Or if the exposure time is 400, 500 or 320, who cares really? It doesn't really make the picture much different. as long as the exposure in general is pretty much correct. And now I'm gonna shoot a picture using manual mode, and then I'm gonna shoot the same picture using P mode, and let's see if the exposure values are similar at all. Okay, here's my test scene. I'll just wait until the sun comes fully out and I'll make the same picture on P and on M. I'm using manual mode now, choosing f4 and 1/1300th of a second, or 1/1300. And okay, I'm gonna take another one at 1,000th of a second because the light keeps changing all the time. But my exposure is about f4 and 1,300th of a second. And now I'm gonna turn on the P mode and let's see what kind of exposure I get. Okay, the sun is out like that, and the P mode gives me f4.5 and 1/800th of a second. So practically very similar values that I chose manually. Not a big difference there. And if you don't like the values that the camera offers you, you can use the program Shift and select any combination, any suitable combination of aperture and shutter speed in that situation very quickly, just by turning one dial. If you are on manual mode, you have to separately change your aperture and shutter speed, which is a lot slower operation. So the P mode makes a lot of sense, and like I said, especially on a day like this, when the light is changing all the time. On P mode, you get the correct exposure every time you turn on your camera, and you also get some sensible exposure values, probably very close to what you would choose on manual mode. Let me show you how the program Shift works. I have a separate video, by the way, where I'm explaining my camera settings. I'll put the link to that video at the end of this video, so you can take a look if you're interested. But let's take the picture. First I'll take a picture using the normal program mode like that. Then I'll use the focus shift. I'll get very small aperture number and longer shutter speed. Then the other way around, I get wide open aperture and very fast shutter speed. Very quick and easy. And of course you can use the exposure compensation to control the overall brightness of the image, and you have a full control over everything, even on the P mode. However, it's still good to know how the manual exposure mode works, and it's good to know what all the exposure values mean. And if you're using the P mode, it's good to keep an eye on the values and see if they make any sense in that situation. For example, in low light situations, the P mode tends to use wide open aperture, quite high ISO and quite short shutter speed. And in those situations, it makes sense to use manual ISO and set it as low as possible. After all, the image stabilizer on Lumix cameras at least lets you shoot on quite long shutter speeds handheld and still get perfectly sharp results. There are many situations where the M full manual mode makes a lot of sense, but I think there are equally many situations where the P mode full automatic exposure mode makes as much sense. I personally think that the manual mode is overappreciated, and then on the other hand, the P mode is overlooked. And I don't think using manual mode makes you any better photographer. I think a good photographer knows which exposure mode to choose in any given situation to get the results he or she wants. And I also think that if you try to do everything the hard way, it doesn't make you any better photographer. I think if some of the automatic exposure modes makes your life easier, why not use them? It's quite cold and windy out here, even though it may not look like that. So I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. Keep your Lumix camera active, get some great shots, and I'll see you in the next one.